is State Representative Bill Zedler, District 96, the Honorable Bill Zedler, I might add, and I don't use that term very often, but Bill is our friend and mentor when it comes to the Texas State Legislature. And what we're going to do this afternoon, we're going to talk about the state legislature and how it works. For you guys that may have went to high school and got one of these charts and everything that shows you how the state legislature works, it really doesn't tell the whole story.
Exactly.
And so we're going to find out how it all works, how a bill goes through the state legislature, and sometimes how it doesn't work.
Exactly.
Exactly. So, Bill, you want to start with the legislative process?
Absolutely, Mel. Thank you. Let me give you a little background of the Texas State Legislature. There are 150 House members. There are 31 senators. They meet 140 days every 2 years. It's going to start off in January of 2015, and it's going to be on the 13th of January. From that day, it goes 140 days straight. And what happens is that, first of all, there's a constitutional restriction so that you can't hear bills in committee for the first 30 days. And then the next 30 days, you can't hear bills on the floor. And so actually all the legislation that goes on as far as getting to the floor commences on the 60th day, and it must end as far as House bills getting from the House into the Senate. It ends on the 122nd day. So in essence, it's those 62 days in there that it's like literally drinking water out of a fire hydrant. And the bills are introduced. Every bill is authored by either a state representative or a state senator. And then it must go through a standing committee. There are about 40 standing committees, and like a lot of the legislation that you and I would be very familiar with would be going through state affairs. It may go through one of the, like it could be the Appropriations Committee, or it could be a Land and Natural Resources, or one of these other committees. But it first and foremost must go through a standing committee. At that point, it goes to a hearing into that committee. If, listen to this, if the committee chairman decides to have a hearing on that bill. Unfortunately, currently the way the House rules are that a committee chair has the power of life and death over every bill that comes before their committee. How do you decide which committee that bill goes through? Well, the Speaker of the House determines what committee that bill will go to. They do have a great deal of leeway, but normally they will, like for instance, I've been on the Public Health Committee. A lot of bills that dealing with some sort of health issues will go through the Public Health Committee, but they don't have to. They also have, right now they have a Transparency Committee. That was one of the ones. They also have a House General Investigating Committee. Those typically take on special tasks that are given to them by the Speaker. So, but a bill author will write a bill, or actually they come up with the idea, the Leg Council, which is a nonpartisan organization in each chamber, comes up with the legislation. They make sure that it's worded correctly. It makes sure it fits statutorily in the law. And then the Speaker of the House decides what committee they will go before. Once they go before that committee, again, that chairman of that committee has the power of life and death over it. But let's say they do decide to have a hearing on that particular bill. At that point, you as a citizen have the ability to go down and either testify for that bill or against that bill. And at that point, what I would encourage you to do is this. If you're going to go down and testify, limit your testimony to 3 minutes. Now, there are some committee chairs that allow you to go longer, but typically the people that are restricted to going longer are what we call expert witnesses. Like in public health, they may be a doctor or something that is doing that, or they may be the person that's with the Texas Medical Board, the Texas Dental Board, or something like that. A lot of times they won't restrict them to that 3 minutes. They're what you call expert witnesses. But people that are down there typically to testify, what I would encourage you to do is limit your testimony to about 3 minutes. Why? Because very often, here's what happens. The committee starts off at 8 o'clock in the morning. The testimony will go till 10, and then they adjourn to go to the floor. Now, if you're early in the session, like in the second 30 days, typically what we're going to the floor for is a lot of ceremonial stuff and that kind of thing. But as we go after the 60 days, then we're taking up legislation on the floor. And when we finish the floor, and early in the session, we may finish at 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. Then we go back to the committee. The thing about it is they're very often hearing a number of bills before that committee, and the end result is that what we want to do is deal with a lot of testimony, and sometimes people are coming from around the state to testify on a particular bill. And now, quite frankly, I have had some people that the committee chairs will allow the testimony to go on and on and on. The end result is, that's why there have been a few cases that I've been there till 6 o'clock in the morning while listening to this testimony. But that's why a lot of the committee chairs, they said, you can limit it to 3 minutes. Why? Because if you stay on point and you got a good, clear message, you can get your message across in 3 minutes. And so then what happens is they rarely ever vote it out of the committee the same day the testimony is heard. They'll typically wait at least a week. But here's the important point. The committee chair, again, has the ability to either call that bill up for a vote or not to call that bill up for a vote. And if they decide to call it up for a vote, then it must have at least a majority plus one in that committee to at least get that bill out of committee. So you can have people vote no and still get it out, but it has to have a majority of the votes to get it out of committee. But here's the thing: even though you get that bill out of committee, that doesn't mean it goes directly to the floor. It then must go before a calendars committee. And again, that calendars committee, the way it's supposed to work is there are a number of members on the calendars committee. Every member of the committee has the ability to what they call put a tag on the bill. If they put a tag on the bill, it slows the bill down. The more tags there are on the bill, the more likely it is to be slowed down, unless the chairman of the committee says it's going to the floor or it's not going to the floor. In other words, the chairman of that committee has the power to get it out within a day, 3 days, or they have the power to keep that bill in committee for the 12th of never. And so then it goes to the floor. And lots of times the clerk is reading the bill and no one else is there, just the clerk. And so that's the first reading. The second reading of the bill, it actually is on what they call the calendar for that day. And what happens is it gets on the calendar for that day. They might get to that bill at that day and they might not. If they don't get it on the calendar for that day, it rolls over to the next calendar. And at that point, they can amend the bill, and if they amend the bill, all it takes is a majority plus one to amend the bill. Then what it happens is it goes and it must lay out at least a 24-hour period if the bill gets a majority plus one. If it gets majority plus one, it then goes to what we call third reading. And at third reading, if you want to amend the bill, requires a 2/3 vote of the House to amend the bill, unless the author decides to accept the amendment. Now, if someone challenges the author of the bill and says, or I want a record vote, then it's going to require a majority of the bill, or the majority of the House, or I'm sorry, 2/3 of the House to amend the bill. It only takes a majority plus one to pass, but if you want to amend the bill, it's going to take 2/3. Now, so let's say it goes to second reading, gets a majority plus one, moves to third reading. At the third reading, gets a majority plus one. Then that bill goes over to the Senate. Conversely, if a bill started off in the Senate, and it passes all the committees there, it comes over to the House, then it has to go through the House committees. Now, it goes over to the Senate. It basically follows the same process that it has in the House. It starts off, goes through the lieutenant governor decides what committee it goes through. That bill will go through a standing committee. Now, here's what happens there. There's really no calendars committee when you get to the Senate. What happens is the lieutenant governor, and that's why that position is very, very powerful, the lieutenant governor basically decides when that bill is going to get to the floor. But the other thing is this. Right now they have, in the Senate, they have what they call a rosebud blocker rule. And what they do is they take a piece of legislation and they say, in order to move in front of that legislation, you have to have 2/3 of the Senate. Okay? You have to have a vote of 2/3. So, unless you have a vote of 2/3, they don't even take up that piece of legislation. Now, there have been instances where the lieutenant governor says, we're not going to allow the rosebud blocker rule to be put into effect for this particular day or piece of legislation. But usually that is kept intact. Now, there are some people lately have been saying, we believe that instead of 2/3 of the Senate to allow it to move forward in the Senate, we believe that it ought to require only 60%. That's the way it is in the U.S. Senate. It only requires 60% of the Senate vote to move forward. And a lot of people believe that the 2/3 threshold is too high. Why? Because basically you're allowing a minority of the people to control the legislation that can get to the floor. And all this is held behind the scenes. In essence, the Senate is basically polling people when they have legislation coming up and determine whether it is getting to the floor or not. And that is not a record vote. Whereas in the House, at least one time when that bill is going through the House, it requires what we call a record vote. That's where they light up the board. Now, one of those, so it's at least had 2 votes. It's second reading and third reading. And one of those is a requirement that it must have a record vote. Anytime in that process, whether it's dealing with amendments or whether it's dealing with the second or third reading, anyone can, if a member of the House calls for a record vote, there will be a record vote, and they light up the boards. There's a big board on each side of the chamber. The board is identical on each side. And on the desk of each House member, there's a green light for yes, a red light for no, and a white light for present not voting. You push that button under that light, and that lights up the board. And so in the Senate, however, the way they determine the votes there is they hold up their finger. 1 is yes, 2 is no, 3 is present not voting. And what happens is, let's say that House bill has gone through the House, goes to the Senate. If the Senate amends that bill, then that particular piece of legislation must go to a conference committee. If the Senate does not amend that bill, but votes it as is, as it came from the House, what happens is that legislation, if it's passed by the Senate, then goes to the governor to either be signed or to be vetoed. If it does change it, let's say the Senate changes the bill, then what they have is a conference committee. And they take typically 5 members from the House, and they take 5 members from the Senate. They get together, and there's a conference committee held. Now, usually what happens is the 1 or 2 people basically try and work out the differences between the bill, and then they have to have a majority of the people signing the conference committee report. Whatever decision they've come as to how they mesh these 2 bills together, a majority of the people must sign the conference committee report. Then, after that conference committee finishes its job and they come up with a single piece of legislation, what happens is this. Both bills go back to the House and the Senate. Or let me put it this way. The same bill, as it's been modeled by the conference committee, goes to the House and the Senate, and then there is no amending of that bill at that point. What happens is there is an up or down vote, and you must accept the completed piece of legislation as is. If it passes both the House and the Senate, what happens is it then goes to the governor to be signed by the governor or to be vetoed by the governor. But here's the thing I think it's important for a lot of people to know. First of all, here's the way for you to have an impact on the legislation. First of all, every person who wants to have anything done, first of all, they should know the name of their state representative and their state senator. And Mel, what I would do is go to let's say you're coming up with a piece of legislation. Let me ask you this, Mel. Is there a piece of legislation that you're looking at this next session to possibly get passed?
Actually, there's 2.
Okay.
There's one of them, the motorcycle safety funding bill.
Right.
And also the red light bill.
Okay.
There's 2 of them there.
Now, the red light bill is the bill that says that if they come up and they look both ways and it's gone through a cycle or something like that. But explain why you want the red light bill.
Well, it's been many times as a motorcyclist or say a bicyclist or just a person in a small car, you pull up to the red light, the red light is malfunctioning because it's not registering the car.
Right.
Or the vehicle, let's say.
Yes.
Motorcycle, bicycle, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't register. You can sit there through several cycles and you get frustrated with
right.
it. And of course, what we want is a common sense bill.
Sure.
That says, hey, you look both ways and proceed.
Right. Okay.
Make sure it's clear and proceed.
And now, let me ask you this. They have this bill in other states, right?
Yes, they do.
Okay. Here's what everybody who favors that bill needs to do. They need to first and foremost contact their state representative and their state senator, and they need to sit down with their state representative and state senator and explain to them why they want this legislation passed. Okay? Why? Because here's the thing. When we're in the House and the Senate, we virtually have to be a jack of all trades, and a lot of times we're a master of none, because what you've got to understand is in both the House and the Senate, they have people, they may be insurance agents, they may be retired people, they may be farmers, ranchers, they may be veterinarians, they may be small businessmen, they may be financial advisors, something like that. They know a lot about that one issue, but they may know nothing about some of these others. But they're going to have to vote on it. And so once you've met with your state representative and state senator, or at least sit down with their legislative aide, okay, to explain to them why you want it. Then what you want to do is, again, once you find out which committee these bills are going to go through, then what you want to do is you want to identify those committee members, and you want to go in and talk with them. Explain to them the bill and why it's important. Otherwise, what may happen is that piece of legislation may get to the floor, and they may not understand the rationale behind it. And so, and friends, let me tell you, if you've seen some of the stuff like in Washington, D.C., where they're saying, well, get to the floor, in 15 minutes, we're going to have a vote. Well, let me tell you, friends, there ain't no such 15 minutes when it's in the State House. What happens is we're lucky if we have 15 seconds. And there's no doubt about it. There are times in there that you are, listen, I don't know about you, Mel, but if I've been on the floor since 10 o'clock in the morning and I'm still there at 8 o'clock in the night, I probably had to go eat. I may have had to go to the bathroom a time or two. And the older you get, the more you got to go to the bathroom. And so what it boils down to is that, again, you may be having to end up voting on that bill on very short notice. Second thing is this. There are times that, like for instance, if you go back to the bathroom, they're going to hold the vote. Well, like for instance, one of the things I do before I go to the restroom, I'll tell my desk mate, all of the desks at least have, there's somebody right beside them. We call them their desk mate. We'll tell them, look, if that bill comes up, vote this way, or what I say is follow the author of the bill, that kind of thing. And in essence, doing is I'm delegating that vote to be done by him. Here's the thing, though. I'm still taking responsibility for that vote. Okay? So when we did that, and always the media likes to get in there and they don't fully explain it. They say, well, the Texas State Legislature that wants a photo ID, look at what they're allowing people to do. The thing about it is we're delegating to someone to vote for us, but I'm the person whose light is lit up on that desk. They're the ones that are still responsible. That is why the one thing I do down there is I make sure that the person I'm sitting with is conservative. Now, having said that, I will tell you this. I've only on a couple occasions have I seen where a Democrat would vote somebody different from what they should have done, okay? Or what they knew they would have done. I will vote. In the past, there's been a Democrat sitting beside me, or behind me. I'm sorry, not beside me, but behind me. And he'll say, Bill, when it comes to that, vote it this way. Or if there comes a vote and I say, I think he would like to have that vote this way, I will vote the way he would have wanted to vote, because I know he's either back in the lounge having to get a bite to eat, or he may in the restroom or something like that.
But let me just say this for our
Sure.
audience right now. Bill, how many pieces, or how many bills come through before the legislature each session?
Thousands.
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 And you have how many days to do this?
That's right. And, well, basically, while you're on the floor, you got about 62 days to do it all.
Right.
Now, in other words, you can't hear them on the floor for the first 60 days. And then what it boils down to is if they have to be out of the House by the 122nd day, the end result is between the 122nd and 140th, what you're basically doing is picking up Senate bills. Like in the House, we're picking up Senate bills. In the Senate, they're picking up House bills. But the other thing is we're doing conference committees.
You once described the Texas State Legislature as a bill-killing machine.
Exactly.
And I've always taken that to heart, that it's incredibly hard even to get a good common sense piece of legislation through the state legislature.
Is
that right?
Exactly. It is. And again, it's because, well, and I'll give you an example, Mel. I can show you piece of legislation that was supported by 70% of the people. Or, like one of the things we do in the Republican primary is there'll be some planks that are put on the ballot in the Republican primary. And let me give you one. Limit the growth of government to population plus inflation. Okay? Why? Because we recognize that all too often the government has grown far faster than population plus inflation. Well, guess what? A government that grows faster than population plus inflation is a government that taxes people more. And so what we found is if you can simply restrain the growth of government, everybody benefits. Now, here's the thing. That piece of legislation never made it to the House floor, despite the fact that in the last, the Republicans have had control of the House since 2003. Okay? Now, that piece of legislation, we did some other things, but in the last 2 or 3 sessions, that piece of legislation has really come to the height of people's attention. And yet we have not been able to get that piece of legislation out of committee. And so I think that's why, one, it's very important to have a Speaker of the House that is as conservative as the people of Texas are.
Let's talk about that a minute. You know, the way our state legislature is set up, who are the people that wield the power in there? You were talking about the lieutenant governor.
That's right.
Ago, and so who is that?
The two people who have the most power are the first lieutenant governor, because the lieutenant governor chooses all the committee chairs, what committees you're going to be on, and he also controls the calendar. On the House side, they have the Speaker of the House. The Speaker of the House is chosen by the 150 House members. The last 3 sessions, the way it's worked is this, that you had 50, 55 Democrats, so you have to have 76 votes to win. And what it boils down to is they find 21, 26 fairly moderate to liberal Republicans. They get together with the Democrats, and then once a person has the 76 votes, typically everybody runs over there and says, well, sign me up, I want to be a member of the team. One time that did not happen, and 17 of us voted against the Speaker who was chosen that way, and the end result was we got 2 pieces of key legislation that had been killed in the previous session. Those, first of all, were the photo ID. All right. Second session was the sonogram. The next bill was the sonogram bill. Both of those bills, had they been allowed to get to the floor, would have easily passed. But what you see over and over again is legislation that, had it been allowed to get to the floor, would have easily gotten 90, 100 votes, but it wasn't allowed to get to the floor.
You know, this is the reason we tell our audience that, you need to be involved. You need to pay attention to your state legislature. And the great thing about this video that we're fixing to release is you're going to be able to go back and play it again and again, because your hair ought to be on fire. Because, like I said, what you learned in school on a piece of paper or out of a notebook is not what it actually is when you hear a state representative explain it. So everybody, especially you guys, you bikers out there that want to get these pieces of legislation passed, you need to get involved. We need to get our ducks in a row, and with the help of guys like Bill Zedler and others that we know, we'll get that done. But we need you involved.
And let me share one other thing with you, Mel. You know, everybody's been used to seeing all these mailers come in the mail, and all of a sudden this piece of mail about candidate A says, well, they're a dirty, rotten skunk, and candidate B is the greatest thing since sliced bread. But then you get another mailer, and it says, no, candidate B is the dirty, rotten skunk, and candidate A, they're the ones that is, they're the greatest thing since sliced bread. That's why what I encourage people to do is look, like, one of the things that I see is there are several conservative organizations out there. Not several, there's about 4 or 5. And one is Texas Eagle Forum, Texans for Fiscal Responsibility, Young Conservatives of Texas. There's Texas Homeschool Coalition. In other words, you look at, wow, Texas Homeschool Coalition. They are an organization that is conservative. And what they do is they bring the candidates in and they ask them a number of in-depth questions. They get far more information out of the candidates than you or I will ever get out of some of these mailers. And the end result is they really kind of know these candidates. And another organization is Texas Right to Life. And I'll tell you one other thing. A lot of people say, well, now wait a minute. That's just dealing with that one issue. My friends, let me tell you something. I've seen it over and over again. You see someone who is rated high on the right to life, you know what? They'll also be 95% of the time, those same people will be strong fiscal conservatives. So you have someone who is on the top with the right to life issues. Those same people are very, very high on the fiscal conservatives. You rarely, in fact, I've never seen an instance where someone is ranked very highly in the right to life area who's conversely rated very low on the fiscal issues. And so that's easy to, but the point is this. You look and say, okay, what do they say about these candidates? And now, every now and then, you will find one of these organizations endorses one, another organization endorses another. But a majority of the time, what I see is if one of them lines behind up one candidate, all of them are behind one candidate. And you know what that tells me? That one candidate they're behind, that's the candidate. Because that kind of gives you a great idea of where they're standing on the economic and social issues of the day. And so that way you don't have to sit there and say, who's lying on these mailers or the TV ads, because very often it's very, very difficult. First of all, if the Star Telegram or the Dallas Morning News endorses them, be very suspect.
Yeah. Hey, Bill, just before we close here, let me ask you, when a citizen wants to contact a state legislature, what gets their attention the most? A letter, a phone call? What is it that gets their attention?
Well, the first thing is that it not be a form letter that they've gotten 100 more like it.
Right.
They respond most to, it really doesn't matter. It can be a phone call, or it can be an email, or it can be a letter. But the best thing is if it doesn't look like a form letter that was done by an association, okay? And let me tell you why. A lot of times what we see is the associations may believe one way, and the people in the association may believe entirely different. I'll give you an example. Do you remember when we passed, or the U.S. Congress passed Obamacare? The AMA, the American Medical Association,
yep,
they supported it. You know that Obamacare was opposed by 80% of the physicians in this country. You know why? They knew socialized medicine didn't work. Here was the thing, and a lot of people didn't know it, but the AMA was going to make billions of dollars out of selling what they call the patient charge codes to all these facilities out there. If you were a doctor or if you were a hospital or a clinic, you have to use these patient charge codes. Well, guess who shows everybody what they are? They were going to come from the AMA, and the end result is the AMA was going to make a bunch of money. Well, so they supported it, even though their constituents didn't.
Right, right. Well, gentlemen, on January 26th, we have Biker Day down at the state legislature. And you guys need to show up. We need to see you there en masse. And Bill, we're going to see you there.
Absolutely.
Also.
Listen, and I look forward to it. I will tell you this, Mel. The Republicans down there typically look and see the philosophical viewpoints of the bikers, and they feel like there's a very good meeting there, a very good connection, because bikers typically have they are typically independent. They are typically people who believe in self-reliance. They are typically people that believe in a personal accountability. Well, you know what? That's what Republicans do too. In fact, one of the things that are key words down there when dealing with the Republicans is free enterprise, limited government. The fact is that they believe in looking at things, well, okay, this makes sense, and that kind of thing, and especially if it's something that it's not going to cost the taxpayers anything. And so I think we've got two great pieces of legislation there, and I think y'all will have a good chance of getting it done. I will tell you one other thing. A lot of times it may take more than one session to get that piece of legislation through, but the important thing is this. Always know who your state representative, your state senators are, and then make a contact to the people that are on the committee that the bill goes through, and then make sure everybody's doing that.
Right. That's cool.
Okay.
And everybody, we'll see you on the next episode. Bill, thank you.
Absolutely. Great being here with you today, Bill.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you for having me.